Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to take a look at a couple of games, or a couple of game fragments. The first is a position you might recognize. This was from Game 4 of the Anand-Topalov match, and the game was won by White, by Anand, a few moves later. Now I know Greg Shahade did a video on this, so I don't really want to spend a great deal of time on it. I suspect that he found a lot of the ideas that I'm going to show you. But I think this game is a nice complement to the next game, or game fragment that I'm going to show you. And we'll discuss the similarities at the end of the video. Okay, so I don't want to just give away everything right off the bat, because then it'll, I think, take away a bit from the pleasure and benefit that you might get by trying to solve these positions for yourself. Okay, well here, White has just played Rook A to C1, and stands a little bit better. Black is up a pawn. It's not an especially meaningful pawn, obviously. It's the, well, you can pick which of the A pawns you want to call the extra. In either case, it's not overwhelmingly impressive. On the other hand, Black's position doesn't have any obvious weaknesses either. It's just that White's coordination is a little bit better, and at the moment at least, it doesn't really seem to come to much more than that. Well, what should Black do here? In the game, he played the move H6, and this is, in fact, not such an implausible move. So it does a few things. So first of all, it, of course, gives lift for the black king, so there's no back rank worries at this point. Secondly, you might think of it as a high-class waiting move, or at least that's, I think, what Black was hoping, that since there's no really good discoveries with this knight, I mean, this knight from C4 can move away, but at least for the moment, there's nothing that it can do that's at least especially damaging. So it's not like there's going to be any material gains to be had by moving this knight. So H6 is a little bit of a temporizing move, but it seems to have a constructive purpose. However, what Anand was able to show really quite nicely is that, in fact, this pawn push is a weakening move. And we'll see what happens. And it will demonstrate it quite effectively. So knight to D6. And Topalov played queen to A7. And on the one hand, I mean, this doesn't seem to be so implausible. I mean, the queen maintains the nice long diagonal, and Black is ready to play something like Rook A to D8, trying to show that this knight on D6 is a bit loose. But the thing is, and definitely Topalov underestimated this, Black has no fewer than 5 pieces sitting on the queen side. And while that might be terrific if the majority of play is taking place over there, there is also the king side to be focused on. And in fact, Black has no pieces defending the area in front of his king. It's just bare. There are some pawns there, but no pieces whatsoever. And Anand shows that this is in fact extremely dangerous. So this knight can come to G4, so it's hitting H6, maybe in some cases F6. All right, and of course the queen backs it up on H6. There's also the possibility, after this happens, playing E5, and then swinging the rook from C1 to C4, and perhaps to G4, or to H4. And, all right, and also we should, of course, include this knight on D6 among our attacking units. So White is going to have, okay, potentially 4 or 5 pieces involved in the attack, while Black has practically no defenders at all. So it's not very surprising that the game, as it went on, proved to be disastrous for Black. So Anand played knight to G4. Now, here, okay, maybe a better move than what Topalov played was knight to C5. This hits, or, well, it threatens to go to B3, but it's also, it can also come to D3, and it's at least getting closer to the king side. But here too, I think White is in good shape. Now he can try 2 moves that are very direct and aggressive, but I don't think either one promises more than a draw. So for instance, this knight sacrifice is met, I think, by knight c to D3, and okay, it hits the rook on C1. There's a hit on the pawn on F2, so notice the queen. Okay, so she's aiming down here, and all told, I think Black is okay. Also, Black may play queen D4 and then swing back over to G7. So knight H6, I think, is not a winning move. Knight to f6 check is also interesting, but probably good for nothing more than a draw. So takes, queen h6, rook f to d8. Okay, e5 again, with the idea of clearing the fourth rank. So knight c to d3, hitting the rook on c1 and again the pawn on f2. And it doesn't seem that white has anything more than a perpetual after, for instance, queen takes f6, so the queen covers f2 now, bishop g2, and then just checking away. Okay, black can't run away because of mate, but if you just go back to f8, there's nothing there. So the move I think that might be the most dangerous, though, is rook to c4. So not sacrificing yet, but first making the useful rook move. And also, it carries a threat of rook to c1, at least in some cases, to try to show that black has an excess of weakness on the c-file. Too many loose pieces there. Okay, so knight to b3 is just one possibility. And now, once again, all of these pieces over here on the queen side, and white really ready to go on the king side, it's not even remotely surprising that black is going to get killed here. So knight f6 check. Okay, now it takes, queen h6, threatening e5, rook over. And okay, there's not really much that can be done about it that's useful. I mean, if you play e5, then knight f5 and white mates on g7. So say queen e7, e5, f5, and rook h4 is winning. Alright, after knight to f6 check, then black has to play king h8. Okay, but now queen c3. Threatening to take here, but also, more to the point, threatening knight to h5. Okay, well, what does black do here? If he plays rook, or let's start with knight a2, hitting the queen. So, queen e5. Okay, knight b4 again, knight h5, rook to g8, queen f4, threatening knight takes f7, rook a to f8, e5, bishop g2, king g2. And this position is still pretty lousy for black. One threat is to play knight f6. So that's winning material. And if he plays knight to d5, then rook takes. Okay, if e takes, what does black do here? See if you can figure it out. Knight takes g7. And this forces a quick mate. So the threat's queen takes h6 mate. And the knight can also swing back into play through f5 in some lines. This is just winning, and in fact it's mating. So queen to a8 is another possibility, but now, what does white do? Knight f6. So we prevent queen takes d5, and on e takes d5, rook c7, white has just way too many attackers here. So d4 check is just meaningless, and white threatens to take, or to play queen f5, or maybe e6. I mean, a whole host of possibilities. So like on e6, if f takes e6, there's queen takes h6 check, g takes, and rook h7 mate. So you can see that there are just all kinds of angles that white can use to snuff out the black king. Okay, so if instead of knight to d5, black plays king h7, well, then queen to e4 check, king h8, queen f3, and now the diagonal's covered, and we're still threatening f7 and f6, and black is in trouble here, but at least isn't losing. So this might be black's best bet. Okay, so that was knight to a2. If rook a to b8, so just some kind of innocent move, then knight h5, threatening mate, queen g7, rook to g8, e5, preparing to swing the old rook over to g4 or h4, sometimes even f4. Okay, takes, knight to d5, so that covers f4 and hits the queen, so queen f3, threatening this guy, king h7, and now once again takes, and now queen to f5 check. Okay, if the king goes back, then knight f7 could be played, but we should just save the rook first. So rook h4. Now, if rook b to f8, white forces mate with knight to f6. And if knight to d4, now knight takes f7. We're not losing the rook on c4, so white has a decisive, or will have a decisive material advantage. Next move. Okay, so that leaves g6. And now, knight f6 check, king g7, rook to g4. And again, black has too many pieces way away from where the key activity is taking place. So these three guys just don't help a bit. Knight to d4 is an attempt to bring it back, but queen f4, let's say rook b2, and now knight h5 check, and this is winning. If king h7, just knight takes f7 is crushing, threatening queen takes h6 mate. And if king to f8, then check, check again. Okay, if king to f8, then this is a funny mate. And if king to d7, knight f6 check, the rook gets picked off, and white's winning on material. Well, I will have a big attack too. Okay, so I think that was actually all I wanted to say about this particular variation with knight to c5 instead of rook a to d8 is in the game. So Topalov played this, and now he just gets crushed. In fact, white has at least two wins here. So there's knight takes h6 check is in the game. See if you can figure out the other one. So the other one is with knight to f6 check. Okay, if takes, then queen h6, and okay, among other threats, white wants to play e5 and take on f6, or even queen takes f6 right away is pretty good. So if he tries to cover it with queen e7, then e5, and we've got a double attack on this bishop. So, I mean, he could give it up. I mean, he could play f5 and just allow that, but white has an extra pawn. Or, sorry, doesn't have an extra pawn. He will probably get an extra pawn, but has a big, big advantage. Rook c4, h4 is a huge threat. If black plays knight c5 instead, well, queen e3 is kind of funny. So we pin on this diagonal, and this gives white a big, but maybe not winning advantage. Okay, so that's what happens if he takes the knight. If he plays king to h8, so again, let me challenge you a little bit to try to figure out how white should win in this position. Well, there's no clear way for white to improve the placement of his knights. I mean, they're both very aggressively posted, and they're about as well posted as they're going to get for the moment. But we can bring the rook into the action in a way we've already seen a few times. So e5, bishop takes g2. The bishop was threatened after all, so that's the simplest solution. And now rook to c4. And the threat is simply to play rook h4, rook h6, and queen h6 mate. And while the threat is quite simple, stopping it really is just practically impossible here. So white is winning in this position. Okay, but in the game, Anand played knight takes h6 check. Okay, black could play king h7 and just struggle on in a hopeless cause, so he just took queen h6 and white's winning. So f6, trying to bring the queen into the defense. At e5. Okay, and so now if queen to g7, takes, and here, that's what I was thinking of before. Here white is up a pawn and has a big advantage to boot in the position. So bishop takes g2 is played, e takes f6. And yeah, this is quite bad. So now the black queen can't go to g7 anymore. So among the threats, there's queen to g6 check, and then f7, or queen to g6 and rook c4. Both should be quite satisfactory. In the game, black played rook takes d6. If bishop to e4, then check here, and as I said, f7 with inevitable mate. And the threat here is to play queen h6 check first, forcing this, and then queen f6 mate. But there are other threats as well, so it's a lost position for black. So as I said, in the game, Topalov played rook takes d6, rook d6 back. And here was a pity. I mean, really, Topalov could have resigned here with a clear conscience. You know, I sort of speculated that perhaps he just wanted to go past move 30 just so that way his loss here wouldn't have been shorter than Anand's loss in game 1. But for whatever reason, he played out a few more moves. But it's a pity aesthetically that he didn't play the move bishop to d5. So see if you can figure out how white can win here. Probably there are a number of ways, but this is an especially beautiful way. Okay, so take your time, stop the recording, put on your thinking caps, and work it out. Well, here's the answer. Queen g6, check, king h8, and now, obviously, we need some more lumber in the attack. So, rook to c4, threatening, rook to h4, mate. well, mating, mate next move. So bishop takes c4. And now rook to d4. Of course, the point is, if queen takes d4, then queen g7 is mate, which is really nice. I mean, black has 3 extra pieces, minor pieces, plus an extra rook in return for what? 2 pawns? Yeah, 2 pawns. So this would have been a great way to finish. Or a slightly more sophisticated version. Queen to h7, rook h4. And then queen takes h4 with the idea that if gh, then rook g8. And because of the pin, black would just win. It would be up 3 pieces. But, of course, queen g7 mate. And so here again, black has an extra rook and 3 pieces, but to no avail. Anyway, in the game, Topalov played bishop to e4. White took, and he's going to play rook to e7. And that was the point of playing bishop to d5, last move for black. Okay, knight to d3. Hitting f2 again with the queen, so we've seen this attack before. Rook c2, queen h7. Here white could just play queen g5 and rook takes e4, again taking advantage of the fact that queen e4 would allow queen g7 mate. But he played f7, which is, well, it's unnecessary and maybe slightly inaccurate, but it's a trivial inaccuracy. I mean, white is just dead one here anyway. So queen f7, rook e4, queen f5, stopping rook to g4 check, rook e7, and here Topalov resigned because, well, again, see if you can work it out to mate here after rook to f7. Well, the answer is this. That's, again, quite pretty. Rook to c8 check. Well, just give away the rook. I mean, if he plays rook f8, queen g7 is mate. So queen takes. Now queen to g6 check. Okay, if king f8, queen takes f7 is mate. So king h8, and now queen to h5 check. So that's the key move. If king to g8, then queen takes f7 check and queen h7 or g7 mate. And on king g7, we take with the rook with check and mate like that. So terrific game by Anand. Really, beautiful game. And what it demonstrated, especially clearly in this case, was the peril of having all of your pieces shoved on one side. That there can be these lightning attacks. I mean, again, from where we started this game, just 12 moves ago, well, 12 moves from the point of resignation, it was right here. And it doesn't really look like there's any attack brewing on the king's side. I mean, okay, you can see knight to g4, but beyond that, what really is there? But white was able to just flood the pieces in that area. So the knight goes to d6, the other knight goes to g4, okay, and we take, and then the rook from c1 is going to come up and over, and so it's just very dangerous. And the pawn, the e-pawn, now an f-pawn, was also a contributing factor as well. And now it's the rook on d6, goes to e6 and e7. So white was able to see that, okay, the preconditions were there for an attack. Black had no defenders in front of his king. So white could afford to sacrifice some material where necessary, because again, if you can just bring enough pieces into that area, good things are very likely to happen. Okay, well, let me show you another game. Whoops, not that one, but this one. Okay, and we're going to start from this position. So this is a game between Larry Christensen and Yasser Seirawan, I think from the U.S. Championship in 1978. I'm not sure if it was the U.S. Championship, but it was from 1978. And, okay, Seirawan with black is up a pawn here. And, for quite a while, it's been a case of white trying to prove sufficient compensation. Now, again, it doesn't really look like the kind of position where black should be in too much danger. Okay, the move g6, g5 is a little bit provocative, but still, it's not really obvious that white has anything. I mean, the queen's on a1, it's in the corner, the knight on c3. Okay, it can come to e4. It's not really clear what the rooks are going to do. I mean, they're sort of up there, but not coordinating in any obvious way. The bishop on d3 is quite good, though. But see if you can figure out what white can do in this position to make his attack run. Well, Christensen found an extraordinary idea. And again, the precondition is the fact that black had his bishop on the queen side, both rooks on the queen side, the knight on the queen side, and his queen on the queen side. And notice, too, that the queen is really shut out. I mean, it's got an obstacle this way. It has a second obstacle here. Oops. Okay. Do that. It's blocked this way. She's blocked this way. I mean, all kinds of avenues for the queen to come and help in the defense are just unavailable. The knight on b6. I mean, how does that get over to the queen side? The rook to the king side. Sorry, the rook on c5. How does that piece get over to the king side? So this really encouraged Christensen, I'm sure, to look for even the most seemingly improbable blows, because he kind of has a head start with black having so little material. So you can afford to sacrifice for your attack, because even though you're down material in let's say the kind of purely textbook sense, if you have all of your pieces around the opponent's king and your opponent has very few defenders, then from a functional perspective, you may actually have a material advantage in the sense that counts. In other words, using pieces to do something important, namely give checkmate. So let's see how Christensen handled this attack. It was really impressive. Played rook takes h6. Fantastic blow. Now, black could decline the sacrifice, but then he would still have a lousy position. So for instance, let's say he plays rook to g8, so he can play king to f8 and try to scurry away. Well, rook h7, and now queen to d1, and the queen is headed for h5, hitting this. And the problems for black are going to recur because, again, almost all of his pieces are locked over on the opposite side of the board. So let's say e5, so that when the bishop moves, the queen will protect f7. So queen h5. Okay, now if bishop to e8, just rook to g4, should be winning. Hitting this pawn, threatening knight to e4. I mean, material is even, and white has a big attack at no cost. So let's say bishop to f5, takes, and now knight e4. And so again, you can see, I mean, all of these white pieces here kind of focused around the black king. And what is black defending with? The queen, kind of. The rook, kind of. But it's not enough. So let's say if rook takes d5, then bishop to e6 is just crushing. So black is losing here. Alright, so after rook h6, 0-1 said, well, why not? I'll take this rook. Alright, well, what now? Well, the answer is rook to h4 check. Another great move. Okay, and if he takes, then queen to c1 check. Say king g7, queen g5 check, king f8, queen h6 check, king e8, and queen to h8 is mate. Or, okay, you can play king to g8. That doesn't really change anything. Just makes it last one move longer. Okay, so after rook h4 check, black can't take, but played king to h7. But now rook h7 check, and okay, the king still has serious problems. If he plays king to f8, for instance, then queen to d1. So it takes white time to get the queen back into play, but meanwhile, again, black has this terribly congested situation that makes it hard for him to bring his pieces over. So again, try e5, queen h5, bishop to e8. Okay, but now queen h7 check, h6 check, pardon me. Okay, if king g8, queen g7 is mate, or rook to h8 is mate. So king e7, queen g5, and it's mate next move. So if king f8, then rook h8 is mate, and if king d7, bishop f5 is a very elegant mate. So don't forget your pawns when you're thinking of your attacking units. Okay, so rook to h7 check, king f6. Okay, they repeated once, and now Christensen has a few ways to win. So see if you can figure out, again, how to end the king hunt in this position. Probably quite a few ways, but I'll show you what happened in the game, and also a quicker one maybe here. Okay, well, Christensen can follow 0-1's advice and invite everyone to the party. So queen to d1, threatening just to go to f3. So bishop f5, takes, queen f3. Okay, if king g6, then queen takes f7 is mate. So king e5, check, again, and mate. So that would have been a nice, simple way to finish the game. But Christensen played a move that's certainly good enough. Knight to e4 check. Now, if king to e5, then white would win like this. b4 check. Okay, rook c3, knight c3. Okay, threatening discovered checks, winning the queen. So let's say queen to d8. And now, okay, there are many wins for white. I think the fastest goes like this. rook takes f7. So we're cutting off the king, not letting him come home. King d4. Now queen e1. So this prepares, in some cases, to play queen e3 check. Okay, e5, and now bishop f1. So now queen to e3 is mate because the knight on c3 will be protected by the queen. So knight c4, rook f3. So now rook to d3 mate is threatened. So bishop to f5, queen to d1 check. So the knight on c3 is protected. And the king has no escape square, so all he can do is throw stuff in the way, and that's checkmate. Okay, so that's knight e4, king e5. In the game, Sirwan played king to g6, and now another very nice move by Christensen here. What did he do? What would you do? I mean, knight takes c5 can't be that bad, but instead of that obvious move, he played queen to d1. Very nice, and the point is obvious, to play queen to h5 and deliver a quick mate. Queen h5, and then queen takes g5. But what about king takes h7? So try to calculate that one out to the end. Okay, well here's the solution. If king h7, queen h5, queen takes g5, and okay, king h8 is going to be the same, queen h6 check. Alright, again, if king to e8, queen h8 is mate, and on king to g8, you have a choice. So you can do it all with checks, or you can do it the fastest way. So the fastest way is knight to g5. There's no defense to queen h7, queen f7, or queen h8 mate. I mean, you can play bishop f5, he takes, and same thing. So it's mate in 3 from here. Or if you prefer to do it all with checks, then knight f6 is best. Check, check. And that pattern, everyone watching this should know. It's a crucial one. It comes up very frequently. Okay. So instead of that, Sirwan played g4. So a very understandable move, keeping the queen out of h5. Well, all white has to do now is just switch gears. Queen to d2. And now white is ready to say hello on g5 or h6 or maybe each in turn, depending on what black does. Okay. And again, though, the kind of cool thing is if he takes the rook, it still doesn't matter. Knight f6, double check. Okay, if king h8, queen h6 is mate, and king g7 just delays it by a move. Queen g5, and queen h6. So, very nice. In the game, black played rook takes d5, which makes sense. Trying to get the pieces over there. So now it covers the g5 square, but as I said, we can go to h6 as well. Now rook takes f7. And, okay, Christensen doesn't find the fastest mate. It's quite possible he was in time trouble. And it's also a kind of an unusual position. So, the fastest mate, I think, is rook e7. And it's mate next move. So, bishop to e6, queen f6 is mate. And on king d4, queen e3 is mate. So, very nice. Instead, he played queen g7, which hurts nothing. He doesn't want to let the king run out through d4. So, king e6, and now, okay, rook e7, and queen g5 is faster, but he played rook f6, king e5, rook takes d6, king f4, g3, and here Sirwan resigned because king f3 is the only legal move. I'm sorry, king f5 is also legal. I apologize, but this gets mated in one also. We can do it actually quite a few ways. Let's do it with the smallest guy, so h takes g4. Okay, and on king f3, knight to d2 is mate. So, two very nice attacking games. Sirwan could have been okay. I mean, the move that we started with when we looked at this was what cost him. So, the move g5 lost. Maybe with h5 he's holding on. But in any case, it's always going to be a very difficult thing in a position like this where, again, black is playing without 4/5 of his army, at least as far as his king side is concerned. So, always keep that in mind. I mean, it might be a position where it doesn't look like you have much of an attack yourself, but if your opponent has everything shoved over to one side of the board, away from his king, you got to look. You got to see if there's some way you can kind of turn the corner and hurry up over there. Especially here. I mean, this pawn structure with white's pawn on d5 and black's pawn on d6 just does a fantastic job of really shutting out the black pieces from the defense. So I think that's a useful lesson. It's not just in a position where you have the obvious build-up, but in a position where your opponent's king is really rather lonely for its own forces to help. And so there can be these games where it looks pretty innocent, but you can just transfer things over rather quickly. And if your opponent can't do the same for his defense, it can be a very short and beautiful game. So thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed this and found it instructive. And, of course, I hope that you can use it in your own games, except perhaps when you're playing me. But, if you beat me using this, then I guess I can feel like I fulfilled my function as a teacher, even if not as a player. So, again, thanks a lot, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.